I am not casting aspersions on contractors.
Yet, predators often don the uniform of the laboring man to scout their prey, exploiting the reality that no industry is immune to harboring monsters. From dawn until dusk, wealthy enclaves like the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona, are quietly infiltrated by a steady stream of outsiders. Long before sunrise, their heavy trucks claim the street corners and curb spaces of these affluent avenues. Hauling heavy machinery through private side gates, these individuals vanish into secluded backyards, operating entirely out of public view. They sculpt the perimeter hedges, maintain the shimmering pools, and repair the sprawling roofs. They lay the very concrete foundations of luxury estates still rising from the desert floor. Week after grueling week, they navigate these silent roads with calculated precision, yet not a single resident ever questions their identity. Their backgrounds remain unverified. Their presence goes entirely unchallenged. No one notices the stranger lingering by a driveway for 45 minutes, and once they vanish, their faces slip completely from memory. Within an exclusive sanctuary like the Catalina Foothills, laborers are omnipresent, yet, in the eyes of the elite, they are effectively ghosts. However, there is a distinctly sinister edge to this phantom existence. 47 days into this harrowing mystery, detectives are finally dissecting this very blind spot with a surgical intensity absent during the initial hunt. These unseen watchers catalog everything, meticulously mapping out security lenses and their exact fields of vision. They memorize which driveway sits empty at 8 o'clock and which vehicle never moves. They track the exact time a dog is walked, instantly noting the slightest routine deviation. An absent sedan or an unfamiliar guest immediately catches their attention, while intimate conversations drift through open windows straight into their listening ears. Almost involuntarily, they absorb the intimate, rhythmic pulse of every single residence and cul-de-sac they occupy. For any laborer embedded in the Catalina Foothills over several months, the private, underlying cadence of that community becomes second nature. It is a profound, intimate familiarity that no external surveillance could ever hope to mimic. This is rarely the result of calculated espionage. For most, it is merely the passive consequence of honest labor. Yet, this intelligence remains vividly accurate, painstakingly granular, and for a predator, dangerously actionable. That terrifying cloak of anonymity has now become the absolute epicenter of this probe. It forms the very crux of the hunt for the vanished Nancy Guthrie. The primary dilemma is no longer just identifying the culprit, nor understanding why an 84-year-old woman was dragged into the dark. Those mysteries remain desperately crucial, destined to be unraveled eventually, but the puzzle currently obsessing seasoned profilers, forensic specialists, and lead detectives is infinitely more targeted. How did Nancy Guthrie's abductor acquire the intimate blueprints of her existence required to orchestrate such an abduction? More chillingly, was the architect of her fate a familiar face, someone operating in broad daylight, masked by the mundane illusion of belonging? This remains a hypothesis. Formal charges have yet to drop, and not a single contractor has been officially branded a suspect. Yet, highly decorated former federal agents are now openly championing this exact psychological profile on the record. Over the past 48 hours, federal authorities have executed confirmed maneuvers that prove lead detectives are treating this theory with deadly seriousness. The corroborating evidence painstakingly validated by veteran reporters across major syndicates demands our deepest, most meticulous scrutiny. Consider the grim reality of how this phantom surveillance operates on the ground. This is no academic exercise or theoretical game. Picture a Tuesday morning at 7:30, just 2 doors down from Nancy's estate, where a standard gardening crew rolls up to begin their shift. Over a grueling 4-hour stretch, a lone landscaper navigates the sprawling lawns atop a heavy riding mower. From his elevated perch, his line of sight commands the entire avenue. He spots Nancy's familiar vehicle, a distinct make and model he has logged in his memory, idling quietly in her driveway. He registers the automatic garage door, lifting exactly at 9:15, only to seal shut 10 minutes later. He watches a courier abandon a parcel on the porch, ringing the doorbell to an echoing, empty silence. Subconsciously, he files away a crucial vulnerability. The woman with the blue sedan predictably abandons her home by mid-morning every single Tuesday. This is not espionage, it is simply physical presence combined with fully functional eyesight. The crew eventually packs up and vanishes to the next job, leaving zero paper trail of what was witnessed. That chilling blueprint survives solely within one mind, a mind returning to that exact vantage point the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and the one after that. Add in those quiet Saturday mornings when the suburban hum dies down and routines shift, and the observer sees something else entirely. Month after month, this steady accumulation of seemingly trivial details paints a chillingly precise, highly exploitable picture. It is a profound level of intimate awareness that no deep dive into the digital ether could ever hope to match. Behavioral experts and veteran criminal profilers refer to this psychological phenomenon as ambient surveillance. It is the silent, almost osmotic absorption of deep tactical knowledge, born simply from lingering in the very same shadows, day after day. Forget the cinematic idea of stakeouts. This requires zero tactical gear, zero premeditation, and initially, absolutely no malicious motive whatsoever. It merely gathers, like dust, in the mind of any regular bystander who casually processes the ordinary rhythms of the environment around them. Yet, in a meticulously executed abduction demanding an intimate understanding of Nancy Guthrie and her precise daily movements, knowing the exact moments she sat utterly alone, and precisely when the cul-de-sac fell dead enough to strike without a single witness, this background observation stands as the most terrifyingly viable theory for how a predator mapped her life without ever exchanging a single word with her. But before plunging deeper into this darkness, certain crucial facts must be laid bare with absolute, unyielding clarity. Every single person in Nancy Guthrie's inner orbit, her daughters, her son-in-law, her entire immediate family, has been unequivocally ruled out. The Pima County Sheriff stepped forward on February 16, 2026, confirming they are entirely free of suspicion. To this day, the slate remains completely blank. Not a single soul faces criminal charges for this haunting vanishing act. Furthermore, law enforcement has yet to point the finger at any specific laborer, groundskeeper, or local utility employee as a formal person of interest. Every psychological thread unraveling in this narrative stems directly from the hardened, verified analysis of highly credentialed former Federal Bureau of Investigation profilers. These are on-the-record insights, corroborated by veteran reporters across major media conglomerates. We are dissecting cold evidence here, not hurling baseless allegations. Should you hold even a fragment of the truth, you are urged to dial 1-800-CALL-FBI immediately. That translates to 1-800-225-5324, or silently submit your leads digitally at tips.fbi.gov. A staggering $1.2 million hangs in the balance. Now, step inside the minds of the detectives and uncover what they are truly hunting. At 84 years of age, Nancy Guthrie was widely recognized as the matriarch behind a prominent national morning television anchor. Yet long before the screaming media alerts, before federal agents swarmed the desert, and prior to 47 agonizing days of barren searches, she was merely a solitary figure anchored deeply within an exclusive, whisper-quiet enclave of the sweeping Catalina Foothills in Tucson. Those who crossed her path consistently painted a portrait of an existence that was fiercely private, peaceful, and tightly bound. Just weeks before the darkness swallowed her, she mailed out cheerful holiday greetings and offered gentle waves to the casual dog walkers strolling by. Outside her Camino Royale estate, she used to lead a local strolling club, an activity slowly stolen away by her fading physical strength. Sunday mornings were spent in digital communion, streaming a distant New York parish tied to her daughter, avoiding the bustling local pews entirely. Her fragile rhythm of life relied heavily on a surgical heart device and a strict regimen of daily pharmaceuticals. Both her blood relatives and the surrounding community insisted her mind remained brilliantly sharp, missing absolutely nothing that passed before her eyes. She possessed a warm, piercing intellect, even as her physical horizons aggressively shrank, trapping her within an increasingly claustrophobic domestic sphere. This intense isolation woven into her twilight years is far more than a tragic detail. It is the absolute crux of the mystery. Dismiss the sensational early narratives that foolishly painted her quietude as a glowing neon sign, practically begging for a predator's attention. Instead, it serves as a razor-sharp forensic filter, forcing detectives to ask, who exactly could have witnessed a routine that barely existed? Think about it if her entire universe had shrunk to a few rooms, and her footprint on the suburban pavement was practically zero. If she rarely graced the front porch, never bleeding into the communal background where a random drifter might easily lock eyes with her. That drastically narrows the list of ghosts who possess the crucial, intimate timeline required to engineer her sudden, flawless extraction. The pool of suspects capable of striking on February 1st is chillingly small, and within that microscopic circle, one specific demographic was entirely overlooked. That abruptly shifted on March 13th, 2026, when a local groundskeeper finally stepped out of the landscaping shadows. Operating daily within the manicured borders of the Catalina Foothills, mere yards from the Guthrie estate, he decided to break his silence. He directed his explosive on-camera confession to Jonathan Lee Riches, an independent digital sleuth broadcasting under the moniker JLR Investigates. This internet broadcaster had practically camped near the crime scene since day one, despite holding no official press credentials or mainstream backing. He operates purely as an amateur digital gumshoe. Yet, the raw video evidence he managed to capture of this worker's testimony proved undeniable. The unpolished clip was swiftly corroborated, dissected, and ultimately validated by major outlets like the Mirror US and the Irish Star. Both powerhouse publications managed to independently anchor his claims in reality, even while the witness's true identity remains fiercely protected by authorities. The words he uttered were stark and devoid of fluff, and against the maddening backdrop of a 47-day deadlock, they are absolutely earth-shattering. He revealed a chilling detail. By March 13th, over a month and a half after Nancy Guthrie vanished into thin air, absolutely no one from local law enforcement had reached out to him. No street detectives, no federal agents, zero investigators of any stripe. While he found this oversight baffling, another crucial piece of his statement warrants intense scrutiny. He casually mentioned that a staggering 8 to 12 months had passed since he last laid eyes on Nancy in the flesh. He recalled a fleeting, polite morning encounter, simply greeting her with a cheerful hello and asking how she was doing. Following that, absolute silence. He spent an entire year maintaining grounds in her exact subdivision without ever crossing her path again. Pause and consider the deeply unsettling implications when you merge those two seemingly mundane facts. Here is a trusted laborer navigating the wealthy enclaves of the Catalina Foothills daily, intimately familiar with the locals and acutely aware of the daily rhythms of these estates, yet he remained entirely off the authorities' radar. A full 6 weeks into Arizona's most massive modern missing persons hunt, while his last visual confirmation of the victim sat nearly a year in the rearview mirror, that initial revelation immediately casts a dark shadow over the true thoroughness of the police's neighborhood canvassing efforts. The latter point introduces profound doubts regarding the victim's daily habits, striking at the very core of how this sinister plot was engineered. If a constant fixture in her immediate surroundings hadn't spotted her in roughly 12 months, the lingering mystery is, who actually did? Did a narrow time frame exist just prior to February 1st where her hidden daily schedule suddenly stepped back into the light? A critical moment when a watchful predator could finally track her movements and exactly whose eyes were waiting in the dark. Let us be clear, this casts no shadow on the groundskeeper himself, as he faces zero formal accusations. He voluntarily stepped into the spotlight simply because investigators missed him, an instinct driven by civic duty rather than concealed guilt. However, his candid remarks inadvertently unlocked a brand new, terrifying corridor of criminal inquiry, a path that verified journalistic sources now confirm federal agents are aggressively hunting down as we speak. By March 18th, 2026, seasoned investigative journalist Brian Enton broke the news that federal operatives had quietly slipped back into the victim's affluent subdivision over the preceding 24 hours, probing locals with highly calculated inquiries. Chief among their demands was a comprehensive roster identifying every single contractor and laborer executing development projects across the Catalina Foothills during the crucial weeks framing her vanishing. They didn't want vague profiles. They demanded the precise legal names of every soul stepping foot on those sites. This is not a routine check. It is a highly surgical, deeply intentional, tactical maneuver. Federal authorities never sweep for exhaustive manual labor manifests unless they harbor a concrete suspicion that someone hidden within those rosters holds the missing puzzle piece. When you mentally fuse this chilling tactical pivot with the stark analysis offered by retired federal agent Steve Moore during a recent media interview, a deeply disturbing mosaic takes shape. With decades spent hunting violent predators, the veteran investigator outlined a chilling hypothesis, deliberately avoiding pointing fingers at any lone suspect. Instead, he detailed a psychological blueprint, a well-documented predatory rhythm that detectives have watched play out time and time again. Across meticulously planned strikes, orchestrated against the vulnerable elite residing in ultra-exclusive gated communities. Predators frequently camouflage themselves in blue-collar uniforms, blending flawlessly into the upscale suburban tapestry like phantoms. They are the faces you see daily without a second thought, the guy mowing the lawn, the man swinging a hammer, the quiet technician cleaning the pool. The former agent broke down precisely why these seemingly invisible laborers possess the exact, terrifying level of reconnaissance needed to execute a flawless, calculated abduction. Laborers stationed at adjacent builds enjoy an unobstructed, panoramic view of the prey's front door. They log every vehicle's arrival and departure, silently studying the intimate, predictable rhythms of the homeowners. They memorize the flickering of evening lights, morning commutes, weekend family gatherings, and those golden, deadly hours when the property sits utterly deserted. An idling utility van on a suburban curb is effectively a ghost. It triggers absolutely zero alarm bells. Neighbors do not dial 911 over a plumbing van, and no one demands credentials from a hard hat in an area constantly buzzing with endless renovations. This, as the veteran investigator grimly noted, is the ultimate camouflage. It provides completely legitimate, transparent, unquestioned anonymity. And for an abduction demanding agonizing weeks of silent stalking, split-second execution, and flawless foresight, that sheer invisibility is the deadliest weapon in the arsenal. Enter Jennifer Coffindaffer, another retired federal operative whose 25-year career hunting kidnappers makes her a deeply authoritative voice here. She echoes this terrifying sentiment through a slightly different psychological lens. Her core premise regarding how this phantom predator gathered enough lethal intelligence to steal the victim is rooted entirely in what she ominously dubs the insider knowledge framework. A fringe figure, someone existing purely on the periphery of Nancy's daily routine, or operating within her upscale neighborhood. Coffindaffer firmly maintains that a peripheral associate supplied the vital intel necessary to execute this plot. Her leading hypothesis suggests that an individual with casual access leaked crucial, intimate details about the residence to predatory outsiders. We are looking at a superficial tie, not a devoted relative, nor a trusted confidant. This would be a person whose presence on the grounds was completely justified and mundane, an individual who possessed a valid excuse to roam the estate, either exploiting that clearance to strike or feeding their gathered observations to an unseen threat. The hypothesis of a contracted employee perfectly aligns with Coffindaffer's psychological profile of the crime. A groundskeeper tending to estates in the Catalina Foothills wouldn't require any personal bond with Nancy to quietly harvest intimate details about her daily routine. All it takes is a consistent, lingering presence and a watchful eye over a period of weeks. This brings us to the chilling revelations uncovered during the FBI's forensic analysis of the property's surveillance footage. Here, the speculation regarding hired help sharply intersects with the hard, undeniable physical evidence of the investigation. Major networks like ABC News and CBS News verified that federal agents successfully salvaged thumbnail captures from motion-triggered lenses scattered across Nancy's estate. These devices monitored the swimming pool, the rear lawns, and the side corridors distinct from the front-facing Nest doorbell system. They operated as independent, perimeter-based sensors designed to silently archive digital fragments even in the absence of a paid cloud subscription. So, what secrets did these tiny digital footprints hold? Insiders tied to the probe revealed to broadcast journalists that the snapshots merely captured relatives dropping by in the weeks leading up to her vanishing. The frames also caught gardeners and pool maintenance crews, individuals entirely authorized to traverse the grounds. Taken strictly at face value, their movements appeared flawlessly mundane and entirely innocent. Detectives poring over this specific digital archive ultimately determined that these snapshots contained absolutely zero red flags. However, a sinister underlying detail completely shatters that initial sense of normalcy. During the exact hours of the abduction, those lenses recorded a total void. Not a solitary motion-activated frame was triggered. On the night of February 1st, 2026, the very same security array that had flawlessly documented daily life for weeks prior, systems that had dutifully tracked the innocent rhythms of groundskeepers and relatives alike, suddenly plunged into an inexplicable blackout. An informant close to the probe characterized this digital dead zone with one meticulously chosen adjective: odd. It wasn't justifiable or easily dismissed. It was deeply unsettling. The hardware functioned perfectly before the strike, and it operated flawlessly the morning after. Yet, during the critical window when Nancy was stolen from her home, the system yielded absolute emptiness. This eerie anomaly links directly to another chilling thread currently being pulled by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos and his detectives. During the late hours of February 1st, precisely when her cardiac device ceased transmitting and the perimeter surveillance failed, several adjacent households experienced a sudden, total collapse of their internet networks. Simultaneously, their personal doorbells and automated home security tech dropped offline in that exact time frame. A resident living just across the street, with a direct line of sight to the victim's house, recalled their dog acting highly distressed and pacing frantically through the darkest hours of that evening. This cluster of technological failures has driven authorities to seriously consider whether the intruders deployed a military-style signal blocker during the raid. Sheriff Nanos went on record acknowledging that his team is actively mapping out this sudden broadband blackout and the suspicious timing of the lens malfunctions. At this stage, the deployment of scrambling technology remains unverified. It exists purely as a highly compelling avenue of inquiry, rather than a proven, undeniable certainty. Still, the terrifying notion that perpetrators weaponized tech to sever digital lifelines within a targeted blast zone, successfully neutralizing Wi-Fi-dependent surveillance without ever laying a finger on the hardware, holds immense weight with the lead detectives. Assuming this hypothesis holds true, though still pending official proof, the architect behind this nightmare possessed a sophisticated grasp of modern residential defense systems. The mastermind knew intimately that contemporary lenses require an unbroken broadband link to successfully process and vault their video files. They recognized that choking off that signal during a specific time frame would conjure a flawless surveillance blind spot without ever tripping a physical siren. Day laborers and maintenance crews navigating affluent enclaves like the Catalina Foothills inherently absorb the intricacies of these high-end defenses. This isn't born from criminal intent. For almost every honest contractor, this awareness is merely a byproduct of their profession, a natural familiarization with their daily workspace. Yet, after months of lingering in the background of these quiet streets, an observer inevitably absorbs critical data. They mentally map out the active lenses and memorize their precise fields of vision. They silently catalog the arrival of fresh tech upgrades or the mounting of brand new sensors. Overhearing hushed conversations drifting from open windows becomes a regular occurrence while manicuring the estate's lush barriers. Over time, they decode the community's defensive grid with a chilling intimacy, a level of insight no passing drifter or random opportunist could ever hope to attain. Former intelligence agent Steve Moore addressed this chilling reality. Uncovering the psychological motive changes absolutely everything, he explained to journalist Brian Enton. A working hypothesis serves as the dark blueprint for the entire manhunt. In this deeply unsettling mystery, the prevailing suspicion, validated by Sheriff Nanos during a March 13th national broadcast, paints a sinister picture, a highly calculated ambush, orchestrated by someone intimately tracking Nancy's sanctuary, memorizing her daily routines, hidden weaknesses, and digital defenses. "We are confident regarding the dark motive behind this strike," Nanos declared, cementing the theory of premeditation. "The authorities harbored grim suspicions from the very first hour," he noted, "and those dark theories have only hardened. A predator executing such a meticulous abduction demands prolonged surveillance. The stalker desperately needed a flawless excuse to linger in the wealthy Catalina Foothills entirely undetected. They required an unbreakable disguise, a completely mundane alibi to prowl those quiet suburban roads week after week without triggering alarms. A blue-collar laborer blends perfectly into that psychological blind spot. We must now examine three distinct calendar marks that form the haunting backbone of this massive manhunt. Viewed through the dark prism of the laborer hypothesis, an incredibly sinister and methodical stalking rhythm slowly materializes. January 11th, January 24th, and February 1st, 3 consecutive Saturdays. Investigative reporter Michael Ruiz unearthed this chilling sequence from federal insiders. He established that the second weekend of January marks the moment a hidden lens first captured the phantom lurking near her residence. This was not the terrifying February 1st visual of a tactical predator armed with a sidearm and heavy pack, but an earlier prelude. The prior frame shows a chillingly ordinary figure devoid of any tactical gear, missing the combat bag, completely unarmed. A silent shadow haunting her threshold 21 days before the violent abduction. He arrived empty-handed, present solely to watch, quietly study, and memorize her life. Journalist Brian Enton later uncovered, via a frightened local questioned by federal agents, that January 24th had quietly become a massive focal point for the Bureau. That particular weekend rests perfectly at the 7-day mark before she vanished into the desert night. Detectives relentlessly probed the community for memories of out-of-place vehicles or forgotten security footage captured during those crucial 48 hours. January 11th, January 24th, and February 1st. Each of these critical milestones aligns perfectly with a weekend twilight. There are absolutely no exceptions. The rhythmic precision of this timeline is so deeply unnerving that seasoned profilers immediately flagged the dark symmetry. A phantom stalker repeatedly materialized on weekend nights throughout early winter, obsessively cataloging the rhythm of an isolated estate and its vulnerable owner. This exact repetition forms the bloody thread tying the laborer hypothesis directly to the massive federal manhunt currently underway. Weekends typically empty the streets of legitimate, permitted construction teams who adhere to standard corporate hours. The weekend heralds a quiet pause in the traditional neighborhood hustle. Yet for off-the-books, laborers, and cash-only groundskeepers, the transient handymen scrambling for any available gig, a Saturday is merely another lucrative shift in the sun. The foothills enjoy mild winter breezes and bone-dry pavement in January, ensuring that neighborhood exterior maintenance never truly sleeps. A solitary handyman toiling on a weekend morning is practically invisible, an entirely unremarkable sight to the wealthy residents passing by. Furthermore, a predator who meticulously built a mundane daily disguise in that community during regular business hours, a stalker whose battered pickup and weathered face had organically dissolved into the suburban backdrop, would easily evade scrutiny on a quiet Sunday. They had successfully camouflaged themselves as part of the scenery. They achieved the ultimate form of suburban invisibility, an absolute necessity for a psychopath conducting prolonged reconnaissance on human prey. Intelligence expert Steve Moore cut right to the bone regarding this chilling psychological camouflage. He described a phantom blending seamlessly into the background scenery, an entity whose daily loitering fails to trigger even a whisper of suspicion. By early 2026, that profile narrowed federal crosshairs squarely onto a shadow demographic they are finally interrogating with ruthless, targeted precision. Yet we must carefully dissect the digital evidence harvested by federal agents to understand not just what it reveals, but the dark secrets it hides. Here lies the terrifying blind spot within the electronic dragnet surrounding this haunting abduction. When major news networks simultaneously leaked that federal tech units had salvaged deleted still frames, from her personal security grid, the files merely captured ordinary maintenance crews lingering in the final days of her life. Mainstream media immediately dismissed the footage as entirely benign. Detectives combed through the pixels and saw no immediate monsters hiding in the shadows. However, a massive flaw lurks within that comforting assumption, a glaring blind spot the sensationalized headlines completely chose to ignore. That very technical limitation breathes terrifying life back into the chilling laborer hypothesis. Her digital perimeter was fiercely myopic, only recording the immediate boundaries of her own yard. The entire network of lenses facing the pool and side gates stared strictly inward, remaining completely blind to the predators silently watching from the street beyond. The lenses documented every individual breaching the boundary, capturing anyone stalking up the driveway or possessing a deliberate reason to visit the residence of Nancy. Yet, their blind spots were glaring. These devices were physically incapable of monitoring the perimeter roadway, adjacent estates, or the active building zone just 3 plots down. They entirely overlooked the utility truck idling silently at the intersection for 2 solid hours on a quiet Saturday afternoon. They missed a laborer lingering in a cab, maintaining an unobstructed view of the front entrance of Nancy, meticulously cataloging every arrival and departure. All of this surveillance could easily unfold without the watcher ever stepping onto her grounds. Within criminal profiling circles, this blind spot earns a specific moniker. Experts refer to it as the surveillance radius dilemma. In an enclave as sprawling and utterly vast as the Catalina Foothills, featuring massive parcels with mansions hidden deeply behind property lines, the geographical dead zones completely evading digital optics are vast. An unknown phantom devoting weeks to tracking Nancy from a neighboring yard, a nearby development, or a stalled vehicle overlooking her drive would never materialize in those digital previews. That methodical stalking escapes the lens entirely, leaving zero trace in the visual files scrutinized by federal agents. Therefore, when insiders claimed the recording showed absolutely zero red flags, they were technically truthful, yet chillingly short-sighted. The video feeds yielded zero clues simply because the stalking, assuming it occurred, unfolded entirely in the dark margins beyond the lens. This glaring loophole explains exactly why federal agents are now aggressively demanding the identities of every single contractor. Pinpointing exactly who operated within the Catalina Foothills during January and early February marks a monumental shift in this probe. It reveals federal authorities finally admitting that the residential security array protecting Nancy, despite its apparent comprehensiveness, possesses dangerous limitations, and the chilling truth of how a predator decoded her daily habits likely hides just off-screen, buried within the mundane routines of laborers haunting the subdivision without ever trespassing on her actual lawn. Furthermore, investigators secured an additional artifact of confirmed evidence that demands intense scrutiny when weighed against this contractor hypothesis. This particular clue was dissected and initially dismissed as mundane, yet it provokes a highly targeted, haunting mystery that remains unresolved. Federal authorities have corroborated, alongside insights from investigative journalist Dave Mack, embedded within national network reporting, that they procured the internal cabin recording of the rideshare Nancy utilized on the evening of January 31st, mere hours before she vanished. The contracted chauffeur collected Nancy from her residence around 5:32 in the evening, transporting her to the home of her daughter, Annie, for a meal. This driver proved entirely compliant with detectives from the very genesis of the inquiry. He willingly surrendered every frame of dashboard optics to federal custody. Agents meticulously analyzed the entire transit, scrutinizing the spoken words of Nancy, her psychological disposition, and her exchanges with the motorist. Based on the findings of Dave Mack, detectives uncovered absolutely zero anomalies within that digital file. It appeared to be a completely unremarkable transit event, a standard Saturday twilight journey delivering a mother to her offspring for a family dinner. These confidential recordings remain sealed from public view, affirming no sinister undertones regarding the actual commute. Yet, the footage breeds a chilling new dilemma, a profound uncertainty fixated on the shadowed asphalt outside rather than the illuminated interior. Precisely at 5:32 in the evening on January 31st, the very eve of her vanishing, she exited her sanctuary and entered a rideshare. She was exposed. She was active. For those fleeting seconds required to traverse from threshold to back seat, she stood vulnerable within her own driveway. Who else was lurking along that exact pavement at that precise second? If an unseen predator had been monitoring the Catalina Foothills sector during the chilling weeks predating February 1st, if they had quietly embedded themselves there on January 11th and again on January 24th, memorizing her weekend twilight habits, then dusk on January 31st, the Saturday she evaporated, provided the perfect window to validate their sinister reconnaissance. A watcher could easily map her timeline, tracking her physical trajectory, confirming her presence at the property, noting her departure and inevitable return, solidifying the terrifying reality that she would face the midnight hours utterly isolated. While the dashcam cleared both driver and passenger, the haunting mystery of who else occupied Camino Real when Nancy crossed her threshold that night is still a glaring void. This realization drags us into a far darker debate regarding the actual perimeter of the police canvas. It is an alarm triggered by the testimony of the landscaper, highlighting a terrifying probability. Countless other local laborers might harbor crucial intelligence that detectives have completely ignored. During a textbook abduction inquiry within a suburban subdivision, interrogating the local service workforce is never treated as a mere suggestion. It operates as the absolute bedrock of the manhunt. Postal carriers navigating the specific block, standard parcel couriers running daily circuits through the quadrant, groundskeeping crews maintaining estates within a tightly drawn perimeter around the ground zero address, aquatic technicians, climate control specialists, literally any professional whose livelihood placed them on that pavement prior to the tragedy. Yet, the landscaper who broke his silence on March the 13th revealed a chilling truth. Up until that moment, not a single badge-carrying official had bothered to interview him. The revelation struck him as profoundly unsettling. Considering his daily presence in the exact streets where Nancy Guthrie vanished, his deep astonishment was entirely justified. Yet the truly haunting dilemma extends far beyond one overlooked landscaper. We must ask if this omission is a solitary crack in the case or a systemic failure. Are there more unseen laborers haunting those manicured streets? Phantoms with daily access and perfect vantage points, utterly ignored by the official investigative sweep. Now, as journalist Brian Enton has verified, federal agents are circling back to that affluent enclave, demanding the identities of every contractor and laborer operating nearby implies a dark realization among detectives. Critical witnesses are still slipping through their fingers. This is the grim reality of tearing up the floorboards. Former federal agent Steve Moore characterizes this tactical shift not as retracing cold steps or duplicating past efforts. Rather, it is descending into the deeper, murkier depths of a case, a realm unlocked only when every obvious path turns to ash. A chilling observation made by retired federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer last March demands our renewed attention. She was analyzing the authorities' deliberate refusal to utilize coordinated citizen search parties. Are federal detectives hovering on the perilous edge of an arrest, secretly knowing Nancy's tragic fate, and thereby refusing to waste civilian resources? Publishing her thoughts openly, she clung to a thread of optimism, praying justice was imminent, regardless of whether that hope holds weight, or if detectives conceal unseen breakthroughs behind closed doors. The lingering enigma of the neighborhood laborers breathes life into the probe as the Bureau relentlessly hunts for identities. The very groundskeeper who courageously stepped into the spotlight had entirely bypassed official questioning. The sinister hypothesis that an employee manipulated their authorized access in the Catalina Foothills to quietly stalk Nancy's daily routines now holds terrifying weight. This notion is being heavily scrutinized by seasoned veterans navigating the upper echelons of the federal justice system. Yet, an additional, darker facet of this forensic strategy demands our unflinching gaze. It is a profound complication recently brought to light through careful public analysis of the Rodero transcripts. An obstacle the actual detectives spearheading this hunt must confront head-on. The sprawling, wealthy enclaves of the Tucson foothills thrive on a massive shadow economy of undocumented workers. Ghostly morning laborers converging at silent dawn rally points, whisked away by locals and builders trading strictly in untraceable cash. Solitary yardmen operating under off-the-books handshake deals, leaving absolutely no paper trail behind. Drifters bouncing between transient crews without permanent bosses, individuals who, out of rational self-preservation, will never willingly walk into a federal interrogation room. This carries no implication of illicit or malicious intent. Most are merely ordinary souls seeking survival, bleeding their sweat into the relentless desert heat where manual labor never sleeps. However, through the cold lens of a homicide detective, this vast, undocumented workforce erects an impenetrable wall, against standard police canvassing protocols, subpoenaing payroll logs, interrogating registered foremen, and executing traditional database background sweeps. Such tactics only illuminate those who officially exist on paper. They completely missed the anonymous stranger handed paper money last Tuesday for quietly pruning a neighbor's overgrown bushes. They failed to touch the anonymous drifter scooped up at 6 a.m., who labored just 2 streets from Nancy's doorstep all afternoon, only to vanish into the twilight without a single digital footprint. Throughout the mild twilight of January and the freezing dawn of early February, right before she vanished, the region's forgiving climate did nothing to thin the herds of manual laborers crawling over the foothills. Their presence was staggering, possibly amplified by the relentless architectural renovations that infect those affluent blocks every season. Men were laboring on every corner. Unseen eyes watched from every angle. And what if a singular glance caught the unthinkable? An unfamiliar car, a chilling routine, or a fleeting shadow that only feels malignant in hindsight. That silent observer might still be hiding not from a guilty conscience, but entirely unaware they hold the missing puzzle piece. Trapped with no secure bridge to the desperate detectives hunting for that exact truth. This stark reality explains the profound gravity behind her family's agonizing public plea to the city. Some random neighbor might harbor an explosive secret without even comprehending its deadly value. Releasing a haunting broadcast through KVOA, her loved ones begged locals to relentlessly scour their own minds, specifically targeting those critical, pitch-black hours surrounding January 31st, the bleeding dawn of February 1st, alongside that deeply chilling late evening of January 11th. The smallest, most insignificant fragment of memory could unlock this entire nightmare. The investigators are spot on. This desperate plea for answers must extend far beyond the affluent homeowners of the Catalina Foothills to the invisible workforce drifting through its streets. The landscapers, the framing crews, the pool maintenance personnel, and the daily package couriers. These are the unseen ghosts of the neighborhood individuals walking those exact sidewalks who might never stumble across the family's desperate social media pleas or catch the mainstream media broadcasts covering the tragedy. If your daily grind brought you to the Catalina Foothills during those chilling winter months of January or early February this year, search your memory for even the slightest anomaly. A detail completely mundane in the moment takes on a sinister new shape in the shadow of an abduction, perhaps an unfamiliar vehicle idling repeatedly along the same quiet stretch of asphalt, or a solitary figure whose eyes were locked on a target rather than focused on their supposed labor. Any fractional shift in the daily cadence of that community, no matter how easily you brushed it off back then, matters immensely now. Reach out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Your identity will remain entirely shielded. Your absolute safety is guaranteed, and a staggering reward of $1.2 million awaits the exact piece of intelligence that finally leads authorities to Nancy. The phantom captured creeping onto the porch surveillance system that first day of February was far from a seasoned operative. When former Federal Bureau of Investigation hostage negotiator Chip Massey forensically dissected that recording, he immediately flagged glaring operational blunders. A firearm tucked carelessly into the front waistband, a highly vulnerable and tactically useless placement. Heavy winter gloves that would render pulling a trigger nearly impossible, coupled with a bizarre, theatrical limp that appeared highly choreographed rather than a genuine physical impairment. These clumsy maneuvers completely contradict the lethal precision of a highly trained specialist. Instead, we are watching an amateur masquerading as a professional, someone armed with tactical gear and a dark blueprint, yet utterly lacking the hardened discipline required to pull it off. Massey pinpointed another chilling piece of the puzzle, one that paints a horrifying picture of the terror unfolding beyond the front door. The timeline reveals a harrowing 41-minute void between the surveillance feed blacking out and the victim's heart monitor ultimately ceasing its transmission. Lingering within the residence for nearly 3/4 of an hour completely shatters the illusion of a sophisticated extraction, an eternity that the behavioral expert declared completely antithetical to cartel or mercenary standards. The former negotiator did not mince words, explicitly ruling out the possibility of a highly skilled strike team. This points to panic intruders completely unraveling when faced with the chaotic reality of their own violent ambition. 41 agonizing minutes. Elite abduction rings operate on a brutal doctrine of fleeting momentum. breach the perimeter, dominate the target, secure the package, and vanish into the night. A flawlessly executed raid takes less than 10 minutes to conclude, with top-tier syndicates routinely vanishing in under 5. An occupation lasting 41 minutes screams of a catastrophic derailment. That massive delay confirms the Predators lost control of the narrative behind closed doors, and the grim crimson stains left behind narrate exactly how the script flipped. Reviewing the brutal aftermath at the entryway, former Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Maureen O'Connell decoded the visceral splatter patterns to form a chilling hypothesis. She deduced the victim never walked out on her own accord, noting the isolated crimson droplets completely lacked the smeared disruption or bloody shoe prints of a struggle on foot. The pristine gaps in the forensic canvas strongly suggested a suspended, bleeding source of body being hoisted away into the darkness by a pair of assailants. The veteran investigator concluded 2 men lugged her limp frame, her wounded head leaning at an unnatural angle. Genetic testing tragically verified the spilled fluid belonged to Nancy. The sheer existence of that biological material, loudly broadcasting an incredibly violent altercation upon the threshold, proves these masked shadows were totally blindsided by the resistance they met inside. They breached that doorway armed with a tightly scripted fantasy. That flawed itinerary severely underestimated an 84-year-old target with a cardiac implant who possessed the fierce tenacity to fight back until she bled. This immense miscalculation destroys the theory of an intimate acquaintance. Anyone occupying her inner circle would have profoundly understood her sheer grit and indomitable will to survive. This speaks volumes of a clinical stalker, a predator who meticulously mapped out her daily routines, memorized the architectural layout, and identified the electronic blind spots. Yet, this phantom had never actually shared a breathing space with their prey. It was a voyeur operating from the shadows, constructing a deeply flawed profile of a helpless target based purely on external optics. The assailant gathered intelligence through the cold lens of surveillance rather than human connection, making the transient laborer hypothesis an absolutely flawless fit for this psychological profile. A phantom blending into the background noise of nearby landscaping or construction sites could silently catalog her movements for months, easily predicting her occupancy. They committed the departure times of her vehicle to memory and mastered the exact hours when the surrounding estates plunged into silence. What they failed to factor into their sinister equation was the ferocity of this specific 84-year-old woman, ignoring the reality that beneath the medical dependency lay the heart of a warrior. Her desperate, bloody defiance shattered their timeline, dragging a swift extraction out by more than 30 agonizing minutes. Yet, despite the chaos, the surveillance grid was successfully blinded. The localized wireless networks were deliberately jammed, proving this sinister theater required a minimum of 2 highly coordinated actors executing predetermined assignments. The primary breach bypassed the front porch entirely, sidestepping the watchful eye of the digital recording lens. Instead, the nightmare seeped in through the rear perimeter, a tactical infiltration point heavily supported by retired federal profiler Jennifer Coffindaffer. She anchored this chilling deduction on a deeply telling forensic clue. Crime scene technicians entirely replaced the rear deadbolts immediately following their preliminary sweep. The architect of this terrifying orchestration, distinct from the clumsy hired muscle who carried it out, possessed a chillingly sophisticated mastery over modern broadband security networks. A chilling, tactical grasp of camera placements and exactly how to carve out blind spots in surveillance nets. Intimate, hidden details regarding Nancy's estate insight far surpassing any casual glance stolen from the quiet pavement outside. This lethal intelligence originated somewhere. It pointed to an individual who had crossed the threshold, someone holding unchallenged access. It came from a phantom whose lingering footprint in that community, upon those exact grounds, or lurking nearby, granted them uninterrupted observation, arming them with critical intelligence, weaponized in ways nobody could have ever predicted. Did this predator clock in for work on those very streets? Were they employed on Nancy's manicured lawn? Could it be a laborer stationed at a neighboring build, gifted with an unobstructed vantage of her daily rhythms? Or perhaps a stranger who never crossed her property line, yet whose routine shadow provided the ambient intelligence required to orchestrate this chilling horror? The truth remains elusive. No charges have been filed. Not a single name has been publicly unmasked. The hunt grinds forward relentlessly. Yet, amid the deep shadows, one verified concrete fact remains absolute. Federal agents are demanding identities. Builders, independent contractors, anyone breathing the air in the Catalina Foothills through January and February of 2026. The Bureau extracted digital fragments, thumbnails capturing groundskeepers and pool technicians frequenting Nancy's estate during the eerie weeks preceding her sudden vanishing. One local landscaper, a constant fixture on those tranquil streets, claimed investigators had yet to question him by mid-March. Meanwhile, a seasoned former federal operative, hardened by decades in the field, laid out a direct, unsettling theory. Predators stalking their prey for calculated strikes frequently mask their sinister reconnaissance behind the innocent uniform of manual labor. Simply because, within the gilded confines of an affluent enclave, a neon vest offers the ultimate unquestioned invisibility. The phantom strolling past Nancy Guthrie's residence before February 1st, the ghost lingering on January 11th or January 24th. During those Saturday dusks when detectives confirm hostile eyes were watching, the watcher possessed a perfect, manufactured alibi. A disguise rendering their loitering completely mundane, granting them the precise psychological invisibility required to execute a meticulously premeditated, cold-blooded abduction. Now, the Bureau hunts for that phantom. They are subpoenaing identities, tearing through dense employment logs, demanding the ledgers of every individual granted authorized passage through that neighborhood during those critical weeks. One keystroke might reveal a monster. If you clocked into the Catalina Foothills sector over January or early February of 2026, if you operated as a groundskeeper, a builder, a pool mechanic, or even a courier, anybody maintaining a routine footprint on those avenues back then must alert federal authorities. This is absolutely not an accusation. You are not in the crosshairs, but your subconscious might harbor a fragmented memory of something quietly, terrifyingly crucial. A stray sedan circling the block, a solitary figure whose gaze lingered just slightly too long on a quiet home. A fleeting detail disguised as normal until reframed by the grim fate of Nancy Guthrie. Your singular tip could blow this cold case wide open. The federal hotline is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Dial 1-800-2255-324. Digit intelligence goes to tips.fbi.gov. A staggering $1.2 million awaits. $1 million from her devastated bloodline, $100,000 federally sourced, and another $100,000 pledged anonymously. Nancy Guthrie's shattered relatives have stepped out of the shadows, issuing their own desperate public plea. Broadcasting through Tucson's KVOA, her loved ones begged locals to violently dredge their deepest recollections. A neighbor could be sitting on a dormant, explosive piece of the puzzle without ever sensing its dark magnitude. Their statement echoes with grief. We pray neighbors retrace their steps, zeroing in on January 31st, the bleeding dawn of February 1st, and that crucial, pitch-black night of January 11th. No fragment is too microscopic. It might just be the skeleton key. No anomaly should be discarded. Let the haunting weight of her family's plea sink in, because in psychological warfare, the absolute truth often hides plainly. Disguised within an unmemorable face, a truck idling at the junction every Tuesday, or a hushed dialogue carried on the wind through cracked glass. The unwitting keeper of the truth may be completely blind to it. Nancy Guthrie remains a ghost. She is merely 84. 47 agonizing days have slipped by. Her failing heart relies on a pacemaker and strict daily pharmaceutical routines. This was a woman who mailed festive cards to the block, offering warm smiles to passing dog walkers under the desert sun. A passing groundskeeper shared a brief, warm hello one morning a year prior. "Morning, Miss Guthrie. How are you keeping?" That fleeting moment became his final memory of her. Yet, someone prowling those avenues in January laid eyes on her much later. Someone meticulously decoded her vulnerable patterns. A predator harvested intimate knowledge regarding her habits, her fortress, and its digital defenses to architect the nightmare of February 1st. And this invisible architect likely observed everything from a vantage point that never once raised a single suspicion. Because throughout the Catalina Foothills, laborers blend into the backdrop, and in affluent American enclaves, a uniform guarantees utter invisibility. Federal agents demand to know who stood in that void. It is the only question that matters. If you harbor even a fraction of the truth, the silence must end right now. Contact 1-800-CALL-FBI or tips.fbi.gov. $1.2 million awaits the crucial lead bringing Nancy back. Stay with us as this dark investigation unfolds. We will meticulously track every single shift in the narrative. We dissect each validated clue, moving relentlessly toward the chilling reality of Nancy Guthrie's dark fate along Camino Royale. Because the silent observer in the shadows must know we are staring back. Ultimately, no mask conceals a predator forever.